Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another session from the Old Wise Asylum. Well, tonight's gig, hopefully it's not as long, and I say that every week and it ends up going on forever, but I don't think this one is. So, I was a bit intrigued as to why the United States will be propping up the Japanese yen. So, I sort of explored it a little bit with the old AI, and it didn't take long before I started to realise, actually, this data needs a serious introduction on historical context. So it's an interesting one because obviously the introduction I've put together all by myself. Basically just how I understand a lot of things that we haven't actually covered much. We've delved in and just dipped in a little bit. But just how did they actually divide everything up in Europe? Excuse me. And but more importantly, what I was setting out to do was to understand how these global creditors are playing with this perceived idea left, east and west, when really it's like it's a game. It's a bit of a game. And so as I was going through that with the AI, I could see that. I could see it clearly. So I thought I'll write an introduction, just to give us an idea as to why. Sounds good? Good stuff, that'll do. Yeah, Paul gave me a sound check before we got on, just to make sure I got it right. I think it's more to do with the mic. It's positioned correctly now. So it's all good. So I think that's the improvement. It's just where the mic is. We were too low down before, and obviously I weren't talking into it. Right, so that is tonight's gig, and like I said, it's not massively long, but it is interesting because we've discussed a lot of history with context all over the show, but we've also presented the idea that, they could have added 1,000 years to the old chronology, and everything that people believe happened 2,000 years ago actually began 1,000 years ago. And, in all truth, that is not way out and off the mark as a potential. It really isn't. It's just that they've reprogrammed everybody for a number of centuries, and they've got rid of all the books. It's difficult to actually pull that out of the hat. Obviously, I had the opportunity back in the 90s to read a lot of books that you probably wouldn't get without a serious search, and of course that has sort of formulated my overriding idea and insight into how this game works. Of course, it's not infallible, and always, as I say, when we do stuff like this, we're actually exploring rather than citing fact, because you're heading into trouble when you start throwing stuff around and say it's a fact, because everybody out there is saying it's a fact, and half of the time it's pretty nonsense. So we're going to explore some history, and then we'll just have a look at how this financial game, what's really going on. And I've had another insight tonight just before we started that may just help show exactly what they're doing, which works exactly in sync with the last few live streams we've done in relation to what it is they're trying to pull in over everybody. Now, okay, we know it's the Noah Hyde law, but that of course is to keep everybody fixed to this idea that it's all the Jews, which of course it isn't. I've said this all along. It's not all the Jews, it's not all the Muslims, it's not all the Christians. It's the people above, the inner circle, above them all, that have a different agenda completely. And it would appear that the best format that satisfies their egos is, of course, the Talmud. Now, at the end of this dissection with AI, I went through a bit of Talmud with it because, as we discussed the other week, and AI accepted that actually it's in its entirety, AI is limited in the form, which is the image they want to project, and it readily accepted that and acknowledged it. And just going through some of the Talmud stuff, clearly it was showing itself as absolutely operating within the form. It is an interesting dissection to a point, but we'll not do that tonight. But I'll have it on the end of the document if you wish to just have a quick scan of it at your leisure. But it's the history, actually, that's turned out to be the most important part of this gig tonight, which I'm quite... It's good because we really have pointed out a lot of data that we've perhaps only touched on, skimmed on in the past, because, of course, we're focusing a lot to finance and imperial power. But it's just what we're going on. And how did they manage to divide Christendom into 3 parts and then add a third part, Islam? Now, a lot of this is down to, I've been finding notes from way back, obviously. Some notes I've found, and of course they're old, there are a lot of them written in pencil, so they're smudged. But in most cases, I'm citing books that I've read. I just wish I could find the actual chronology. I had a full chronology of every book I've ever read, and then the ones that I used to go back to after a few years, because I always found that you'll read a book, you might think you've understood the concept of it or the points that they're trying to make, and then maybe you come back to it a couple of years later and you've expanded your awareness, and my God, there's so much more data in that book that you weren't aware of before. If I could find that would be amazing, because I itemised every single book I'd ever read in the 90s and where I'd gone back to them again. And back then I also had notes as well, but with all the time periods that I've been homeless, I've lost so much stuff. It's just, I don't even know where it's gone, to be honest, but in all truth, I still haven't fully unpacked everything yet. So, I may find a lot of this stuff at some point, but not yet. But in the most case of what I've picked up tonight, it's just notes that I've seen, and it's just reminded me of certain realities and ideas that I was studying back in the 90s. So it is an interesting history, even if you're not interested in the financial aspect. But it's so important that if we understand what's going on, if we can see the picture that they're playing, it makes things a little bit easier. It's that you've no void, have you? You've no void, so you're not going to be afraid, you're not going to panic. So it is a bit of an interesting exploration with AI on why America is supporting the yen. But of course, everybody you'll know the peripheral of it, you'll know the basic structure of it, but it does go into some interesting sidelines that you make think, right, well, that makes a bit of sense. So it is good one tonight, and it's the historical context that I thought were quite good, and it's took me a few days to put together. So who's on parade? Well, Mew is, for a change. Evening to you, Jeff. Paul says, early doors. Evening to you, Paul. Good man. Slipknot says, all right, Sean. Right. Did it work, that, Trev? Did it work, what I suggested? Because it worked for me. I'd be interested to let me know whether it worked or not. Upward says, good evening, inmates. Good evening, Sean. Evening to you. Upward, nice to see you. Evening, Sean. Mods and chat, says Paul. June says, evening, Sean. Chat, evening, June. PY says, of the music, good evening. How do? Sound is good, says Mew. Thanks for that, Jeff. Lex Smart says, evening, Sean, and all the wise style. Evening, Lex. Good to see you back, mate. Where have you been? Anthony Demore says, evening, inmates. Evening, Anthony. It began 1,000 years ago in Blighty. I think what they were doing were destroying everything that were here. And nothing that we've discussed or dissected and investigated and explored in the historical context over the years, it doesn't, the idea that they've had it 1,000 years doesn't take away from what we've explored. It just means that instead of it happening way back in the mist of time, it happened last week, around Blackburn area. It's one of them. So it doesn't change the context of the stuff we've explored, but it's just the timeline. And in all truth, I think that's correct, because if you look at the last 1,000 years, the war that the world has been involved in, and that's every nation, China, they've all been at war for 1,000 years. So I really do believe we're coming to the end of the 1,000-year reign of the shitbag. And they're desperate to try and entrap the entire world in this global system so that they can carry on again. So they're just trying it on, I think. Anyway, who knows? We don't know, because we weren't here 1,000 years ago in these current avatars. So thanks for that, Anthony. Jerry says, evening Sean, I alter the wise Salem. Evening Jerry. Jim drinks. He says hello Sean, everyone. Evening Jim. Hey Sean and chat. Oh boy, I can't wait for this, says Ulick. Thanks Ulick. Nice one. The Tackle Bay says, good evening all. Evening to you, Tackle Bay tourist. I've just used iodine. Well, honestly, dude, those three, I put iodine on it first. So this is, for anybody that might be interested. I don't know whether I told you before, but I had a dark patch on my arm, and I'd had it for years, and it never did out. Then all of a sudden, last year, it started to grow, or earlier this year, I can't remember. All of a sudden, it started to grow and go funny, real dark black. So I'd said to a friend of mine, like, when your mate had skin cancer, what did it look like? And she said that. I said, oh, okay then. I said, so right, this is what I'm going to do. So I put iodine on, let that dry in, put some copper sulfate on, and then put some DMSO on. And on the second day I did it, I broke the skin deliberately. And by the third day, it had gone completely. Completely. So, all this panic in the avion as soon as you see a blotch. If you just don't shit yourself and think a bit and look at what you've got, crack on and get on with yourself. You don't really need to go to the doctor so they can start cutting you up, diagnosing you with this and that, getting you on drugs. Before you know it, you're funding a pharmaceutical company and all their jolly holidays. So you just on iodine, you big puff. Why? That's scaredy cat stuff, that, man. Well, has it worked? Anyway, has it actually worked? Jerry says, how are you, Lick? Okay, Jerry. Lex says, I'm usually listening, mate, usually through and blocker, but can't comment. Big fan of the Wise Asylum and your continued efforts with the group. Thanks for that, Lex. So, why can't you comment? That's not good. I've made my own eye drops with DMSO. Feels like, ooh. Have you diluted it? Let me know, because I've got a little bit of DMSO left. I might just try that, because if there's one thing that I noticed that I do have issues with, it's my eyes. They do seem to go a bit funny sometimes, and can you imagine that? That wouldn't be very good, would it? My eyeballs dropped out. It'd be grasshopper, wouldn't it? Doing my live streams grasshopper kind of shit. Anyway, right. So let me know, Lex, how you dilute it, because I'd like to know. I might give you that a bash myself. Right. So well, let's just crack on, because there's not really much to talk about, is there, apart from Johnny Come Latelys being Johnny Come Latelys all over the shop, talking shit. And it worked. Brilliant. That's good stuff then, man. Excellent. It is good stuff, that iodine, isn't it? It's brilliant stuff, actually. But yeah, that's excellent. Right. So, the Usury Creed, I've called this one tonight, and it's basically how they completely and utterly reprogrammed Europe to allow itself to be put under the Usury Creed. And of course, rebellion, revolution, and reformation, and all these rebellions is all it takes, really. And wars everywhere, because, if you go into war, whether you're a king or you're a village or whatever, straight away, what's the first thing you need? Well, you need weapons, so you need money, or you're making it yourself. Somebody getting paid somewhere for war at all times. And so obviously, if these at the top end are always making war, then they're always needed for the credit, the usury credit. diluted with distilled water, but you can use sterile water. Thanks for that, Lex. What's the percentage-wise on each thing? So I don't want to burn my eyeballs out, you know what I mean? So, brilliant. What's the actual, what kind of percentage are you diluting it, mate? You have got the grasshopper energy. Well, thank you for that. But you can walk on rice paper without making... Oh, yeah. And can I walk on... and I can walk on hot stuff. And do the... Do you remember that? Do the eat thing, tattoos and all that. I remember that. I used to like that. David Carradine. That's interesting if you get into him, because he was well into investigating dragon societies in China. And he got knocked off. Yeah, that's just reminded me. David Carradine, yeah, he was well into this game. And he was well into undermining and exposing these Chinese secret societies and got knocked off. I remember that now. I'd forgot about that. Interesting stuff. Right. So the Usury Creed is tonight's gig. And you might be surprised because this is the overriding schism in Christianity. This is the cause of it. And many people don't realise. But more often than that, more people don't realise how embedded it is in Christendom. And where it came from. So, there we have the coat of arms, still under the Malta, of course, the Johannite tradition. Okay, so this is the division in Christianity, or the gospel, let's say, because it's not Christianity. It became called Christianity once they got this new raft of nonsense in. And it doesn't appear to be that long ago. I mean, there's even, some of my notes I was finding that and I don't know where I got it from, but there's a book, and I don't know who it's by, but they went through a lot of data to suggest that Islam were formed in 1919. 1919. Can you believe that? And Judaism was formed in 1870. Now, we're not going to go into that tonight because obviously they were just notes. I don't know whether I've got a bigger paper on it or not, but anyway. I just used a few drops of DMSO in a dropper bottle. Okay, thanks for that, Lex. So, it's down to me whether I burn my eyeballs out. No problem. 50ml dropper bottle, Lex. Oh, okay, let's get on it because I don't want to kill myself. Not that I give a fuck anyway. So the Johannite tradition, a primitive church in the modern age. Now, you might be surprised at just what this actually means. But more importantly, what it did and still does. And how he's got so many guys and people fooled. Even today, more so today. So, we're just going to quick run through a sort of idea that we know has been running for a while, and that's the Exolite system versus Israel. And I say versus, they're actually two sides of the same coin, but they're obviously looking to be opposite so that they can synthesize down the line. And just because we're using the term Exolite, and just because we're using the term Israel, doesn't really have any connotations to Jews, save for the fact that people that are claiming this stuff call themselves Jews. But the Israelites were Canaanites, for God's sake, and Hebrews and Judahites they were all Canaanites, all these people anyway. I mean, the Israelites were burning stuff, killing kids, doing demon rituals and all bloody sorts of stuff. So anyway. So Exolite v Israel, it's just consider that bricks, right? So this brick system that they've got everywhere, and it's slowly creeping in. And when you look at it, it's a dead cert because it's the only system built on something solid, manufacturing and gold and silver. So it's like, okay, it's got to win, hasn't it? At some point, you might think. So consider the bricks as a physical representation of the Exolite kingdom headed by the Dangor and Kadore and of course the Soon. And this is a trust. So let's suggest that is one trust. All of itself. It's got all the Indian and Chinese manufacturing muscle in that trust. Now, Israel is a designated Rothschild adventure, so we are told, and acts as the controlling theological structure to the adherent religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Because it does control it all, doesn't it, as a theology. The theology of the three religions, so claimed, then Israel is basically running riot and everybody's dancing around whatever the hell Israel's doing. So it's a controlling mechanic, basically. And as Bill Cooper said, it's specifically to bring about the last battle of Armageddon. So I don't know whether that's right or not, but we'll have to wait and see. It's potentially there on the table. Let's look at it that way. To the adherent religions which are based in the West, this is the Vatican State Trust. So you've got two trusts, you might say. Not that they're not all one. I'm not suggesting that for a second. But as we stand today, in the separation, this division of the world, we could say there's the Eastern Trust and the Western Trust. Even though we know the Vatican State and the families that control that, control all, especially China and India. Because the Jesuits have been there forever. I mean, they were kicked out of China at one point, but I don't think they've ever been kicked out of India. Right, so there's two trusts going on. So we're looking at, say, Sassoon, Kadori, like trustees in that sense. Just in the same way I suggest that the Rothschilds are seen on everything because they're actually basically the trustees, which is what you're going to see. Now, this form, or projected image, because that's exactly what it is, it's a projection, an image that they want you to believe, is a dividing mechanic to cover the fact the above families have intermarried and are therefore controlling both sides to this platform projection of both distinct trusts. So even though you might say they're separate, they're all interbreeding, they're all one and the same. So this one group controls both trusts. And then, of course, if they're the trustees, they're only holding the legal title on behalf of the real true beneficiaries. If we accepted that the above families respectively act as the trustees for each trust, then we are seeing the public projection of the families holding the legal title for each trust. The real beneficiaries remain hidden. I should shut up because I've actually written what I always talk about. The overriding legal structure to which both trusts intend to sanction as the administrative public system under which all capital, including humans, will be administered is the body of law called the Noahide Laws. That the seventh Noahide Law is the framework that will govern the populations based on the previous 6 Noahide Laws and all them sub-laws that they don't tell you about, and has been implemented across global corporate governance since the post-World War I bankruptcies and post-World War II creation of the Insolvency Administration Trustee, the United Nations. So the United Nations is basically administering all the bankrupt governments. Or they're bankrupt in name, but they're insolvent and being administered in insolvency. This is why we're getting taxed to death. While at the same time, they're liquidating every single aspect of every nation. Land, water, energy, property, persons. And this is exactly what they're doing. And this is what Trump's doing. Trump is liquidating America. You know, they're just liquidating the whole lot. Right. The intention is to fuse both trusts into one global mechanism. That's the intent. AI will be the judge, and all agencies below it will administer the justice it decrees taken from the digital record relating to the asset or your commercial account designated in the all caps or all capital products, all caps, all capital. Yeah. Which, of course, coming in as that, you are a product, and therefore you are a commercial entity. So a few more joined in, because I think I need to get into the habit of keeping up with you guys a little bit, and then I don't just run off. So I think I made it a bit shorter, so we might not be too bad. After a few days, I added a few more drops, some really good vids on YouTube on DMSO. You can also a few drops in water and drink it. I've drunk DMSO. It's not a problem. But I think the meal kicker with DMSO is the fact that whatever you're using with it, it'll stuck it right in. That's why I did the 3-part thing on my arm DMSO last to make sure the other two went straight into the skin. So thanks for that, Lex. Treen, lovely to stay overnight. Is Treen in? I've not seen her. Oh, there she is. Oh, so you stay with Treen. Thanks for being a great host and looking after us. And now a visit to Rosalind Chapel. And Ian's in. Beanbuster says, hey guys, hope you're all well in the asylum. I'm a bit late, but better late than never, I guess. Bring it on, Sean. Thanks for that. Ian, how you doing, mate? And Jerry says, franchise trust. Hey Jerry and Mew, all bless. Thank you and Lisa for coming to visit. Anytime you know that. Okay. Ian into you, Treen. So we know that the intention is to fuse them eventually, isn't it? It's synthesis. All this division, it's always for some kind of synthesis. And I think if you look at it, well, we'll get to it till we get to the AI discussion before I launch on that. So if this is the real structure of global events, then all the financial and war agendas are but the projected form based on division and a direct result of the ability of the trustees of both trusts to secure land and human capital and transform each liquid capital, paper and digital. So everything that's real on the earth is being transferred. First, of course, it was paper, and now it's all going digital. It really is an house of cards. You know, Alice in Wonderland, there's so much knowledge in them if you actually are looking at it from that perspective. It's a house of cards. It's all claim of right, paper. It's not real. And everything that BlackRock and Vanguard have as holding companies, 30 trillion between them. 30 trillion on paper. It's paper. It means nothing. But while we believe it, these Johnny-come-latelys that are collecting all this paper nonsense, they all sway, you know. That's how ridiculous this game is. Where are we? Which is then held in huge holding companies such as BlackRock, Vanguard and State Street to the tune of 30 trillion. Either way, the entire grid is built on paper, shifting to digital, which it is. Which is why they need you all in the digital. Because then you're part of the pretend game. So it's a claim of right written down, has no basis as a physical claim of ownership ever over the earth. It's a shadow on the wall and the house of cards. So we'll bring a bit of Plato in there. That's what we're looking at. When we see this and believe it's real, that's because we're looking at the shadow on the wall. It's garbage. It's not real. It's not, and if fire goes out, it's gone. There's no shadow. So the four-more fantasy to which global populations submit is a direct result of the methods employed to secure the minds of the global populations through the many differing religions claimed to be based on real and tangible historical fact. But for this to be real, then history would have to be based in solid fact, for this form projection to be sanctioned on real foundational directives, which it isn't. It's foundational directives as a play, as a theatre, as a shadow on the wall. But as long as people believe in this stuff, then it moves them. They really are slave matrices, these religions. Then we have the old world. It's myths and substantial architecture evidence that screams a hidden narrative to the entire accepted academic presentation of historical fact. Because when you look at academic historical fact, there is no mention of a civilization. It goes right back to Rome. Forget that. There's been a massive civilization that went right across China, all the way to North America, across Europe. And it's just sidelined completely. But the architecture is still here to see, because them are the buildings they wanted to keep for themselves. It's there to be seen. They are hiding something so huge that the shadows on the wall seem real. In following the shadows on the wall and in not paying attention to the fire, this projected form is the controlling factor to every thought process you have, and thus the following action of every soul entrapped in this false matrix acts in accordance with the form. So everything everybody does is in accordance with the dictate of the form, not the substance. But then In so doing, the form becomes substance. It's not the substance, it becomes a substance, a substantive physical reality. So by definition of the projection has divided everything right down to the family, which it has done. I put something up on the Facebook where it must have come from some society book, how that the slave masters of nations have known well that to enslave a nation, you have to enslave the woman, meaning you have to remove her mind into your hands, because then you control the womb. And if you look at what's happened in the West, that's exactly what's taking place. So, yeah, it is, and that's why the women have been the target since the suffragettes were launched, because that's what they were launching, really. Sisters doing it for themselves. Anyway. By definition, the projection has divided everything right down to the family and is a system based entirely in division, from which every synthesis of perceived opposites they require is pulled together on ignorance of the facts. And while we exist divided in our mind, they have control. So there is the division, really. It's not whatever's going on out there. From being a child, they completely and utterly divide your mind, so that you're no longer trusting yourself. You are completely dependent on everything external. So the first division that they're programming is of the mind. So is this not the current statutory legal system? Absolute. Of course it is. Systems in which fact or substance, which you're all finding, is not considered in the form if it creates a conflict or ambiguity with the form. So this is why they remove facts out of your claim or your defence. Because if you're bringing in facts and it's creating ambiguity with the form of statutes that they're using, they can't see it. They've got to take it out. It's fucking, I know it's sad, but it's the situation, and it's where everybody, that's the brick wall that everybody's coming to. So that's what people need to start to realise and change accordingly. Right, so now we're going to get into some history. That's the preamble. So, this division, how have they done it? And it has been done not that long ago. You could say from the, well, actually, you know, I'll not say that, but definitely the last 1,000 years, because the Crusades kicked it off. And remember, the Pope, the Vatican, the Church didn't. It wasn't the Vatican then. That went built to the 1400s. The original Church didn't have a Pope in the West, only the East. Everything was in monasteries here. Now, there were some gigantic ones in France, and they seem to be sort of like the head of it all. But every monastery in every area was there for the people in common. They were, you know, natural healing centres, you know, and they were like a hub of the community. Right, so we dissected the historical framing over the years, which we have, and none of which stands up to the academic outpouring that controls the system. So all these dissections and explorations we've gone through academic nonsense doesn't stand up when you come to that, especially when it comes to archaeology. So I'd say on that alone, academic nonsense is absolute shit. It's infantile nonsense, so they can carry on playing playtime. So timelines and chronologies have been mixed together. Events in one nation have been transported over another. We have considered the idea that 1,000 years has been added to the biblical chronology, which takes us back to the Crusades, from which the banking method and fusion of many theological histories took place. So we know this, from the Crusades on, banking became important, especially first in Venice, Lombardy, and then eventually spread across East and West. And pick your Odyssey family for that. You know, Farnese came this way. I think Orsini went to the way. Pallavicini, which could well be working for the Farnese, so there could be a cadet branch. But not only have they run these isles after Breakspear left via or fronted by the South Stanley back then, don't know what's happening now, they're certainly running Islam. Absolutely, 100%. Now, before this mixing, there had to be an existing European binding system. Otherwise, as they say, we were monkeys, and that's not the case at all. Now, this new black culture that's coming out is so off the wall. A lot of this stuff that the blacks are being taught about their role in civilization, and it's based entirely on the idea that the original Egyptians were black Africans. Well, that doesn't pan out at all. It doesn't pan out when you look at the hieroglyphs, and it certainly doesn't pan out when you look at the rest of Africa. So I think there's a major blag gone on there with some professors of black culture who have spun a yarn, and that's basically the backdrop to all this idea that blacks are the origin of civilization, and it's just seriously not true. It really isn't true. Because in order to present that in the way they're doing, they have to cancel out Europe as ever being civilized, and that it's always been cavemen. No, Europe was taken over by something else completely. And you know, the shining light to that is the Khazars, because of the way they lived. You know, when I studied them back in the day, a bit like, you know, if you watch the film Highlander, remember the old Highlander film? There can be only one. Brilliant film if you're looking at it from an occult perspective. But the Kurgan, the Kurgan is a representation of the Khazars. But if you look at the narrative of that film, what it is, it's that you've got Connor MacLeod, and he is on an internal spiritual journey to find the real him, who he is, really. Can only be only one. And so through the game, he has to decapitate these aspects within him. So you've got the black man, he just likes to party. You've got the sleuthy kind of guy that he kills in the car park. You've got the hoity tout, who's Sean Connery. And then, of course, you've got the baser side of man, the Kurgan. It's a great film for that when you look at it that way. So it's the same kind of thing. None of this is new. And there's a lot to be said about that culture. And of course, now today, the Jews, well, they're not bloody Jews, are they? They just were forced into it by the Russians back in the day because they were killing everybody. And they were stealing everybody's name and killing folk that were coming through on the Silk Road and the other trade routes to the south. So it were the Russians that decided they had to force them to take a religion. So it didn't mean they were religious. They just were forced to take it. So something else has gone completely and taken over Europe. And it's been money that's done it. Because one thing these black guys forget is the fact that, you know, the West kept records. And that's where we get our data. You know, you Africans haven't got any. And a lot of them will cite that as the reason why we can't prove it. Well, if you can't prove something, you can't just make it up. Because all these immigrants that are coming in here now are thinking they've got some kind of right. So I watched some the other day, it was a big group of blacks that had come in, this big guy. I want my free money. I want my free house. I want an English woman. This is my dream. And I'm thinking, he fucking believes it. He believes it. So somebody's pimped his head, you know. It's ridiculous, really. But that's where we're at. And so it's this mismanagement of data that's causing a lot of these problems. So this idea that Europe were thick and stupid, I don't love it. The Dark Ages, every time they said there's a Dark Age, it's because they don't want you to see what was going on. Usually because it were a lot better than what we're told was an evolution, if you will. So what have we got here? Ian says, a word of warning about applying DMSO show. Never ever use a dropper bottle, as DMSO, being a solvent, will take the chemicals in the rubber dropper into the body also. I've been using it for some time. Point taken. Thanks for that, Ian. Thanks for your input, says Mew. DNA markers in the European peoples point to the origin of people in Europe. Yeah. Nora's Mew, better to use a spray bottle. And oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, spray. Mind you, it's plastic. You need a plastic bottle. Still in a plastic bottle there, though, Ian. You know what I'm saying? Right. So, Crusades, we know that banking kicked off. Okay, and then of course, because these Crusaders were coming back with all this new data and all this nonsense, they started to put division in what was. And what was at the time were the monasteries, and they were operating, in my opinion, on the Gospels because they were all about community. It wasn't about competition. It was all about holding everything in trust as it should be so everybody could survive. Yeah, common land, common forest, fishing, and all this kind of stuff. So, in my opinion, what was built entirely in the Gospel. Now, not the Gospel as we're told it, because a lot of it's turning him into a pantomime figure. But I mean, the core teaching is how I'd put that. So I'd say that was the monastic system, which wouldn't work for commerce. So they had to change it. Before this mixing, there had to have been an existing European binding system of the many different cultures, which looks more and more like the architecture and glimmering insights we get relating to how they used their ether to substantiate the energy requirements, and its hidden structure that another system has worked tirelessly to undermine, subvert and fully take over. And they have worked hard to demolish it, not just architecturally, but historically. I mean, they had airships back in 1600s. This is what a lot of these towers were for. They were landing ports, because they didn't land these ships, they just tethered themselves to these towers. If we take the Crusades as the starting point, a pivotal time in which many existing empires came together in battle, which they did, and between them realised that if they pulled together, they as an elite of each imperial force could share in the bounty they could form from a new system in pyramidal form that ensured every action by every man, so that's you lot, gave them a cut and elevated them to the top of the pyramid in a manner that would hold by itself, which it would, it's a pyramid structure, and ensure the system remained in their bloodline hands eternally. So this is the Tower of Babel. You don't call it a pyramid, of course, you don't want it to have any connotations to Egypt. But that's the Tower of Babel. It's a pyramid structure in which the toss bags suck everybody else dry. That's basically the symbolism of it all. And so they were off hoity-toity over in the Crusades. They were all doing battle. Then thought, well, hang on a minute. You know, we're all hard as nails. All these pussies back over at home, they're all pussies. We've learnt all this new knowledge, these systems that we've picked up from Babylon that they were all hiding everywhere. Why don't we set it up and we take over? Makes sense to me. Because it wasn't the church that created the Templars, and that's what people don't realise. They took them on, but they didn't start them. So the Crusades initially, or the moving into the Levant, wasn't a church gig. It became it, of course. The first method was to form huge military orders set up in a manner in which the inner core elect knew the real agenda to build the pyramids. That's the inner sanctum. The outer circle will be built upon the existing cultural and religious beliefs of whichever culture the orders were to be formed. Therefore, with ease, they could enlist the populations to the cause, because the image of or form that were given to them instilled the idea of protection of their own culture and their own lives. This is the consequence of one's body controlling each respective opposing force. So the inner sanctum is controlling all, and whichever area they were in, they'd form the order that they wanted to recruit from within that accepted cultural norm. So it didn't matter whether you were in Persia, whether you were in North Africa, Germany, France, Scandinavia, Russia. It didn't matter where you were. The inner sanctum intent was to build the pyramid, the tower, and whatever they needed to say to them out there is what they'd say. That was the image they'd form, and everybody would be happy to recruit. I mean, if you actually do study the Templars, that they were massive systems all over Europe. They were castles, they were educating, they were training people. It's where everybody went for an apprenticeship, and it went on for a long time. And people just think it was these a few groups. No, it was a massive thing. It was like, if you think about university systems, it was like a university system across Christendom, but also military. were massive. And that's where everybody went if there were no job. It was a huge thing. Huge. Right. So the inner core is about building a pyramid, which basically just means a system whereby everything you do gives them a cut and it constantly goes up to them. And eventually they liquidate everything through your hands, as they're doing with the person. You know, they're liquidating all the estates because we're coming through as their commercial account. To achieve this, the theological oversoul to the existing global civilization would have to be divided. So as I said, it were monastic. It were all about community. It were about working together, not competitiveness. That has to be the only... It's a gospel teaching, that, isn't it? Let's be honest, okay? Or let's say a Yeshua teaching, because the gospels have been pissed around with you like you wouldn't believe, to have everybody focus on everything apart from the actual message. So from the 10th century, which is 900s, when they started to get this first crusade going, which they had to do because the Mohammedans, because they weren't even called Muslims then, you know, they were Mohammedans, that's what they were called. Islam weren't even around, and these lot were a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys, and they'd invaded something like 28 countries in the space of a year. This is why people attacked. Charles Martel had knocked hell out of him. Charlemagne continued that. So they'd militarised Europe way before the Crusades. And they didn't really have a choice, because the Mohammedans were getting a bit too exciting, because, of course, they were in Spain. And, of course, Martel stopped them from entering France and taking France, although they did sack a few places. So from the 10th century, we saw the breakup of the monarchies and the growth of usury. And I say that because the monasteries, the monarchies were dependent on the barony. That's what kept them in that position. That's what kept the kingships going. And during these crusades, all these barons were encouraged to put their estates into trust. Yeah, and off outfighting. And so it was starting to break down the sort of power of the monarch. And then, of course, King John, while they were all off outfighting with Richard, he had the sheriffs built up, and he were basically going to the trustees that had been left in trust of it and saying, look, we'll back you if you want to make a claim on it. And so they were transforming the barony, basically. And that's what they were actually doing, which were a bit naughty. So they were breaking up the monarchies from the Crusades, but they were also smashing up the monasteries as well. In order they could start to insert usury, because of course war means credit, borrow, debt. So this has always been a direct result of monarchs having to war or ready for war. Any divisions within a nation would ensure the protesting group would fall into the hands of the usurers as the only source of finance and support. So every time there's a rebellion, who is it that comes into the rebels? The money. I mean, it wasn't the case necessarily with America, because Russia actually supported America without any usury attachments. So not all the monarchies, in the old system, when they were operating, I'd say, under the gospel, it weren't all bad. It were a good thing, and they looked after each other, and everybody appreciated what were being formed in America. It's like the only free land at the beginning of it from these numpties that we're going to have a look in a minute. So any divisions that take place in a nation, they're straight into the hands of these usurers. And the usurers usually have caused the division in order that they can secure this debt. So by the time the 13th century, which is the 1200s, had completed, the monarchies were in debt to the Venetian Lombards and the Genovese. But of course, the Lombards were Germanic. And then the Venetians are probably not the Lombards. They were all separate and they all hated each other anyway. But when it comes to money and things, they're all in it together. So by the end of the 12th century, nearly every monarch in Europe owed debt to these usurers in Europe. The rise of the banking families such as Medici, Farnese, Orsini, Fugger, Breakspeare, Borgia, Pallavicini, etc., Aldobrandini is another, became the real power over all monarchs. This credit was born of the actions of the Byzantine Empire, which had a pope. While in Europe, the church was set in all the monasteries, which acted as schools and natural remedy institutions, and kept the land for the common use of the people. That's what they did. So they were educating everybody, keeping all the land in its area, in its catchment or its parish, together. Nobody could encroach on it. Nobody could take it for their own ends. It belonged to the whole thing. All births and deaths were recorded in the parishes. So there were never any problems of inheritance because everybody knew everybody in the village. So if somebody died, they knew exactly who were taking it, who were going to. And that was the old monastic system. So it were localised. Much better. Now this would change under the Tudors, and this is why they put the Tudors in. As they launched enclosure. So lots of things were going on. Now Edward I, I know a lot of people say, well, he did have a big part to play in formulating what we class as Parliament now and all. But his main thing was, at the time, there were big arguments all about who owned what. People were coming forward saying, I own this land, I own that castle, I own this. So what he was doing was pulling in the common law to arbitrate. And basically what he was saying, well, look, if you're going to say you own this, bring some deed. Don't just come Johnny come lately and saying, I owe this and it's not fair. If you're saying you've got a claim, bring the paper. Bring it to this court, and that man there will judge on my behalf who owns what. And then, of course, it expanded when they were all killing each other, when they had little fallouts. They were all losing the firstborns. I mean, and this was going on before that. And so, again, the idea was to create this tennis court where instead of killing each other and everybody running after the firstborn kids, they could bring their arguments to this tennis court and have it dealt with there. So it's war without killing each other. That's sort of like the origins of where law started to creep in. But Edward I pulled that in. He pulled it together as a body for that reason. And so Eddie gets a bad rep, but I'm not so sure. And in the main, it's a bad rep from any Catholic writings, which when you understand who were not necessarily Catholic, but all the sea families were behind the changes that they wanted through Pallavicini, through Stanley's, and then it does make sense that they attack Edward. And Edward III said, get stuffed to Lombards, I'm not paying you back, and bankrupted them. But they moved to northern Wales, which is a lot of people don't realise. And they were bad uns. They were bad uns, them lot. So that's your Germanic straight away in North Wales in 1200s. So this credit was born of the actions of the Byzantine Empire, which had a pope, because the Byzantine Empire was very wealthy because it was trading in the east. So it had a lot more wealth, the Constantinople, than the Western Europe, which is probably why some people think civilization, it wasn't civilized. But it was in the sense that it was all community, and the monasteries looked after the parish. Which actually schools, natural institution, and kept the land for the common use of the people. There was no pope in the West. This would change under the Tudors as they launched enclosure. So under the Tudors, this is when, especially Henry VIII, he started to create this massive statutory power separate from English, the English system. He started to put it all in the hands of politics and barony. And that is just an example of the enclosure. Parish of Featherstone in the West Riding of the County of York. And this is how they just acts for enclosure, and everybody on the common were just kicked off. And then they did the Vagrancy Act, which turned poor people into criminals, and that's how they fed the colonies, Australia and in the main, and then America as well. So this is where they did it. And this were the Tudors started this. The enclosure. Not so much throwing everybody off hither and thither. But, enclosure made people poor, knocked them off the land, they were homeless, and the Vagrancy Act turned them into criminals, and off they went to the colonies. Or off they went bushwhacked in the navies, Not good, is it? That's how it worked. And this is all starting under the Tudors. So this is your Holy See families moving in. Land ownership, that's apart from land in common. As these families gained power, one in particular, the House of Medici, pulled into Europe what is called the Renaissance. Now, it was the Medicis that were behind the Renaissance. They were the biggest promoters of it. And he had a lot of trouble doing so because it were going against what was. Now, history, as we have said today, begins with what was formed over the Europeans during the Renaissance era. So you could actually say everything we think we know about Christendom, about Judaism, and about Islam never even existed before the Renaissance. It was just however we lived in civilization, all in common, all working together. This new system that they called the Renaissance is where all this theological play and everything that we're being fed, revolutions, rebellions, reformations, all come and stem from this shift in how Europe saw itself. Now, it began in the 1300s with art. It were an art thing. That's what the Medici were pushing first. And of course, some of that art were, they didn't like it. And he had a lot of trouble. And then the introduction of new concepts through art becoming a real influence during the 1400s. So in the 1300s it began, but during the 1400s is when it really started to influence. And we're talking aristocracy at this point. This is where they were reprogramming the aristocrats into this new version of everything that we are told was the Renaissance. So Da Vinci and all this stuff all belongs to this. Now, in 1437, the introduction of the printing press came up by Johannes Gutenberg. Now, unfortunately for this guy who invented it, he ran out of money but borrowed from a wealthy moneylender, Johann Fust. And he got a loan of 800 guilders, but then he got a second one. And of course, these loans came at high interest. And he had a big interest rate. And of course, this guy's an inventor. He's not a businessman. Exactly why they lent him. Now, he couldn't pay the loans back, and the court basically handed the printing press in its entirety to Johann Fust. So from that point on, the printing press was now in the hands of the financiers. Okay? So it's only going to be used by the financiers. Now, the first thing to be printed, once it had shifted, was a new theology called the Bible. Okay? So this idea of a Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, and all the rest, is an invention. And this is 1400s. Okay? So there was no such thing as a Bible. Didn't exist. There was the gospel. That's what run Christendom. Not this, what's this Bible malarkey? And this is how they were playing this. So first they've got the aristocrats twisted the melon with art, because they all thought they were, it's art and I know all about it, so I'm definitely going to believe it. Grandmasters say, no, it means this. And they go, oh, yes, you're quite right. I must tell that my son and my daughters, and we'll tattle on with that. So first it's aristocracy. And then they've got the printing press. But of course the Bible's not being given to plebs, is it? This is again for the aristocracy. Now, it was not the existing theology called the gospel. So it wasn't the Bible. There's two completely different gigs. It was an extended historical narrative which placed another group on top of the European. Because it now included an Old Testament. Remember, Marcion did not create the first canon with any Old Testament, no Matthew, Mark, just Luke. Because John hadn't even been invented then. This is where it gets interesting, and this is what a lot of people I don't think realise, what the division is in Christendom between the Templar orders and the knightly orders and the church itself, or the gospel, not the church, the gospel. This is where the schism comes in, you see. And even people that are obsessed with Templars today, and I knew a lot of them when we used to go to the lectures up at Treen's neck of the woods. They really suck into this, but they're just being played. And the people that were running the conference, it was, you remember Rat Scabies, drummer out at Damned? Well, it were his mum and dad. And they were clearly intel. It were an intel operation. And they were just coaxing all these wealthy people into just believing all this bunkum about how fantastic and amazing the Templars were. And that they were the real followers of Christ, which gets interesting in a minute. What are you saying? Okay. Dark brown glass spray bottle saying you're a real chemist. I've got dark brown glasses and they've got the squidge on, but then I don't take it all the way up to the squidge. So I'll probably be alright using glasses I've got, Ian, to be honest. If Brennan O'Connell be right, American industries base are fed up with American decline amid EU city London, Qatar, Israel. Pedram, they're not seeing it right. It's a blag. It's a blag. They're moving the city of London. It's just a blag, honestly. Anyway, evening to you, Pedram. Modern Britons, Volume 1 and 2, David McRitchie says, Jumant. Not seen that. I don't think. It doesn't ring a bell anyway. I cover repatriation of manufacturing from China. This is exactly what we need to do, repatriation of manufacturing. But to do that, we need to get rid of all the regulation, because that's what's destroying enterprise in the West. It's the regulation. The taxes are ridiculous, Pedram. It's people in common land were forced into the factories. Well, that comes later. First, who were forced into homelessness, couldn't feed themselves, off to colonies. So, in this printing press, they invented something called the Bible, okay, which never existed before. It was just the Gospel. Luke. Okay, and so now they give you another testament that's bigger and older and better, bigger and faster, so it has to be boss. Now, you can understand how they got the aristocrats into this first, because then they said, well, you represent them. So you have a right to do all this. In fact, you have a right to eat them. You have a right to kick them off the land because you are the chosen. Yeah? And again, this is no reference to Judaism. It's not. Because this is all part of this invention. Jew, Christian, and then if you believe my notes, Islam were created in 1919, which makes sense because the Quran that they're all on was released in 1924. Interesting. So I don't know. I'll not go any further into that because I'd have to work out where the hell I got that from and how I study that a bit more. So the Bible form was specifically for the Christian community. So they created this Bible, but it wasn't for anybody else. It was just for the Christians. Why would they do that? Why would they not give it to the Jews? No, because of course this was the usurers putting their shit in ours. And so this thing called the Bible, this holy Bible, because it was the Vulgate before all that. It wasn't the Bible like this. Was only written for the Christian community. I mean, there's a red flag in and of itself. And at the same time, that this is being gigged, 1475, what's going on in Rome? Well, they've started to build summit. So the monasteries are being undermined. The monarchies are all in debt. This Renaissance gig's come out there. It's got the aristocrats thinking they're now even more special than they were. They don't actually need to do what gospel says because they're chosen and they can do what the fuck they want if they can get away with it. So they're shifting the melon, man, of the hoity-toys. And then so this new Bible now that's now being taught. Not allowed to read it yourself, but it's being taught to the Christian communities. But at the same time, what they're building, they're building this thing called the Church of Peter. So the Vatican didn't even exist at this point. Didn't exist. Not until they started to build this Church of Peter. Reminds me of the nursery rhyme, Peter and Paul. So if Marcion built the first canon on Luke and Paul, this new gig called the Bible had to be based on something completely different, hadn't it? So at the same time that they released this book called the Bible, given to the Christian preachers, monasteries are being demolished, and they're building this Church of Peter or St. Peter's Church it's called, which was started in 1445 and was built over the catacombs. Well, you do, don't you? You always build a holy place over a graveyard. Of course, it's natural. Everybody does it. Yeah, if you're not smart. And the clever guys are building all over there. We're building on the grave of Peter. Well, okay. Whatever. Peter being Papa, Father. That's it. Huh? And it was built over the catacombs, which is, of course, is a graveyard. This was the beginning of the Vatican. So it's only in 1400s. So look, Rome didn't die, it just shifted. Yeah, the empire were quiet. Usuries. So it's all been pumped out of Rome. This forever. You've got the empire, you've got the church. Now the image that had held the old world civilization together, you can say, was being changed. Okay, so it's being changed completely. And of course, to do that, they have to change everything top down. And you can see that it's historical context. They were demolishing everything. And they called it the Renaissance. And this is what people get fooled by. Oh, Renaissance, it must be good. No, it was a complete screw up. In my opinion. So the original canon formed after Yeshua was around 110 to 50 years after the event, apparently, by Marcion. He used only the Gospel of Luke and the writings of Paul. Now, he gave a huge donation to whatever the church was back then, because he was a very wealthy guy. Well, he wouldn't have done that if the church were called Peter, would he? He wouldn't have done it. So building this Church of Peter in the 1400s is a shift. And at the same time, they've invented something called the Bible. You know what I'm saying? It's making a bit of sense. And it's not all that long ago. Now, they're going to have a trouble, aren't they? Because everybody's Catholic at this point. They're going to have a bit of a problem getting this stuck down everybody's neck. Clergy's going to be going off the wall. But you've got a division there. Remember, it's the inner circle that's running this, and they're going to get what they want. But because it's they're running outer circles, they have to at least let the outer circle believe that what they believe is still real. And so they have to implement it slowly. But you can see there's the schism straight away in what was. It was put in there. That was the original correlation of the teaching of Yeshua, apparently. That's Marcion. No Old Testament and no reference at all to the term Jew because it had not yet been invented. One can suggest that from the architecture alone, the old world was far in advance of anything that is constructed today. You damn right it is. With the suggestion of free energy, which is what it seems to be, and airship travel. Now, that would be an achievement made real if the peoples existed in a more collaborative way, as opposed to competition. So, for everybody, for the system to give the idea of free energy, you couldn't be doing that if it were competitive, would it, and industrious and commercial. It wouldn't happen. So the old world wasn't based on competitive commerce. Can we agree on that? Which is how you can get this idea of free energy. Why would a monarch create his gig like that? You're looking at Gaddafi, aren't you? That's what he did. He was working in exactly the same way, you might say, as I would suggest the old world did. The state, the money were working for the people. You know, none of them paid for their gas and electric. The state paid for it all. I mean, how they managed to get a colour revolution going in Libya is beyond me. The way that he looked after his people. But anyway. Right, where are we there? So, whatever we can see when we look back at the old world, it was way more advanced than this. And for it to be so, the old methodology and how people existed had to be completely different. It had to be collaborative, community, as opposed to competition. We're not talking about communism, which is proper twisted shit. We're just talking about collaborative, and not at the expense of each other. And that has to be seen as a synchronicity with the teaching of Yeshua. There's one other teaching teaches that. Now, people say, well, Islam does. Well, it doesn't, because it's extorting them. It's all right saying, oh, it's peace, man. But when your mosque, your bank is extorting you, that's not collaborative. That's them saying, you will fucking pay us this money because we want to expand mosque, innit? It falls flat on its face. We know Judaism is completely competitive. Not necessarily amongst themselves, but against them they see as non-Jews, Goy. Or nations, which is what it is. So it can't be either of those two. If you're looking for a system that were collaborative. The only one that comes in that form is the real teaching of the man, not the garbage pantomime that you read if you read the Gospels. The original canon formed after Yeshua was around... I've done that. Now I've got a link. If we turn to the year 1500, so that's 1500, not that long ago. Either because the Vatican being built was to serve the new Bible, because that's a possibility. So we have got this schism coming in. Churches going, oh my God, shit, we need to do something. Now either they were moving in sync with it, which is possible, or they were trying to oppose it. So they were running around like flies in a bottle, trying to stave off this schism that were being formed through this Renaissance by the Holy See families, who by this time had got their own popes in. So it's not an easy gig, is it? When your clergy's here, but the Pope is one of them. So it's a mess. So they were either building this Church of Peter to serve this new biblical script, or as a means to subvert the proposed superiority of the Old Testament. Now, Pope Alexander VI, or Rodrigo Borgia, he commissioned the 3 synoptic gospels to be formed. Okay, so there were no 4 gospels before, there was just one. So he commissioned the 3 synoptic gospels, claimed to have been at the hand of Erasmus. Now, Erasmus is an exceptionally interesting character. Exceptionally interesting, if you've ever studied this fella. Now, he was a Catholic, but then when you look at his works, this guy is the cause of every single reform that came after. So he's an odd character, that Erasmus. And according to history, or some history, not academic, he was commissioned to create 2 other Gospels, Matthew and Mark, because obviously they wanted to present Luke as being absolutely true, because look, these other 2 guys were same gig. There's no John here yet. John hasn't ever been invented. This is the kicker, people. John hasn't been invented. There were 1 gospel, and all of a sudden, this shit's coming in come another 2 gospels to support the one. That's what we're going on. So that was Pope Alexander VI. Now, the 3 synoptic gospels formed by Erasmus. Now, he's an interesting character, and he's embedded in almost every separatist ideology relating to the Bible. And he has ties to Ignatius Loyola as well. I think he rescued him at some point. So we can see Erasmus is obviously a part of this commercial group, because Ignatius Loyola was very connected to the Marranos in Spain, and again, these commercial side of imperial Rome. The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels, okay? Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There's no John here. This is where the kicker comes in and why we've got this massive division. But we'll get to that in a minute. And they're referred to as the Synoptic Gospels because they include many of the same stories. So you can understand why they went, oh, let's get some more. Look, these two guys are saying exactly the same. And this is how they became two other Gospels. And because they're often in similar sequence and in similar or sometimes identical wording. Well, that'd be a clever move if you were going to rewrite stuff to support the other. But there is one major point of note. The Gospel of John was never a part of Christendom until the next great work from the Presbyterian, them Aggie Shaggers, who were really all the European bloodlines brought in by the Bruce, David I, who then annihilated the Scots, and have been doing it ever since. So it's not an attack on the Aggie Shaggers, because I know a lot of them and they love the people. Hey, Treen. They're all lovely, and I know a lot. Even up here, there's a lot of Scots, and I know them. I get on with them all the way. I've never not got on with a jock, ever. So when I say Aggie Shaggers, we're not talking about Scots lads and girlies. We're talking about these hoity-toys from Europe. So the next gig in this charade of schism is going to be the introduction of the Gospel of John. But that didn't come until the Presbyterian work called the King James Bible was created. And if you look at the King James Bible, it is commercial statute rule book. There's 86,000 translation errors in it. Come on. Yeah, it's not good. You know? So you can see now, here we go. And people have hanged on to this like it's, But let's wait and see why John's been put in. So in response to all this rebranding of theological doctrine, the rabbis, or followers of the Mosaic law, managed to get Martin Luther out of that church in 1517. They encouraged and financed Martin Luther to go against the Roman Catholic Church, because Luther were a Catholic. Everybody were. To try and get his church to reform. So the church weren't going along with this commercial shift, taking on the Bible. No, they got and invented two more Gospels so that they could support the one that they've been working on for whatever. I mean, maybe it's 2,000 years ago, Yeshua, and 1,000 years ago when this satanic shit took over. That's quite possible. 1,000 years of Christ, 1,000 years of Satan, which means the shit asses are coming to an end. That's got to be a good gig, hasn't it? So they're digging their own grave, which sounds of it. They are digging underground. Wouldn't it be funny if it just collapsed and they were all stuck in it? You don't want them to die, you want them to be stuck. And if they've got like food for like 20,000 years, they'd have to breed down there and stay down there forever. Wouldn't that be funny? It'd be good if we had cameras and we could watch them. It'd be poetry, let's be honest. That won't be poetry. Anyway, never mind that. So they financed Martin and said, look, go on, pal, go and just cause a load of apple. Get shit going on here. And mainly what he was rebelling against was what it were that this schism bunch had been putting in. But obviously the clergy weren't having it. He created two more Gospels to support the other one. They said, no, we're not playing this game called the Bible. You lot are a bad bunch and we're not bending the knee to you. So they were financing Luther to go against the Catholic Church, try and get his church to reform. And that was called the Reform Movement or the Reformation Movement. In 1517, Luther nailed 95 reforms on the church door castle in Germany for the Roman Catholic Church to reform. The rabbis began to create, behind Martin Luther, a Protestant school. So this is where you get your Sunday schools coming in. But that were really... See, that were moved here on Blighty from Macclesfield, and it was the introduction of Methodism. This is where the Sunday schools for English kids took off, but obviously they're working on this premise. So the rabbis began to create Christian Protestant schools for Christians, which is this biblical game to take you off Yeshua. And then, of course, the church countered and created proof schools for their secular community. So even though they were building Church of Peter, that could have been commerce, boys. The clergy were still, and the academics in it were still trying to fight against this schism, and they invented Matthew and Mark. It didn't work because they were just about to introduce something that would really screw it up. The Gospel of John. Now, this method shifted minds to a new group of concepts, which, of course, were driven by the banking families. Once the image was installed, they began to subvert what was, and a new version of the theological backdrop that would ultimately serve the pyramid system through the control of commerce. While formed and set at the feet of the aristocracies in the 1500s, it would not be launched until 1611 in a new version of the biblical script upon the public mind, with the added Gospel of John to consistently undermine the gospel itself. Because that's what John does. It completely undermines the teachings according to Yeshua. That's what it does at all points. And who are the Johanites? Well, the fucking Templars. Inner sanctum. Yeah? Can you see now that this is really played out? Lancelot Andrews led the group of 47 scholar theologians appointed by King James I to create the King James Version, published in 1611. The translators were split into 6 committees working across Westminster, Oxford and Cambridge to translate the Bible from its original Hebrew, Greek and Aramaic text. They invented the Gospel of John, which synchronizes with the structure formed during the Crusades to form division within Christianity itself. This is the opposing schism between what was the church, the monasteries, or Christendom, and this crusading, hoity-toity church bags. The King James Bible is the commercial script embedded in theology. It gives rights of ownership over land and people. It satisfies borrowing, credit, and usury. It confuses the teaching of the gospel by engineering everything outside yourself to be more important than mastery of self. That's what it did. It created the religion. You needed it. Whereas before, it were a parish community. And because the monasteries had power, they could keep the common, everything working in common. Yeah, and they didn't burn wise women because they were the healers that worked in the monasteries. So this, and I've said this before, anything that brings about death and murder is Talmudic. And the Inquisition in its entirety was a Talmudic-based structure. You can really see that this whole civilization was not built on this shit show. It was built on following what I would suggest is the only thesis that gives you that brotherhood, and that is the teachings of Yeshua. And Islam doesn't. I mean, people say it does. It's extorting the community. How can it be collaborative? It's not collaborative. It's violence, forced, and excommunication if you don't. That's not collaboration. That's not community. That's not loving your neighbour as self. That's garbage. Right. It aggrandizes race. Even though they're not a race, it's a religion. Built on religious belief. So it aggrandizes race, one race over the others, based entirely on religious belief, which is what the Bible presented and put in the mix. It doesn't mean the Mosaic law didn't exist before, but as I've said before, Moses was a fucking pharaoh, David and Solomon were pharaohs. So of course it all comes out of Egypt. But of course the Ptolemies had took over Egypt, and that's where you see the pharaohs from that point. We don't really know about what Kemet were before. Now this is where the black guys are coming in and saying they were all black Africans. I don't think so. I really don't think so. Not if you got your wing and an eye at Atlantis and the bits that you can find. And I studied that for years, for the bits I could find. And Kem was a place that one of the priest kings went to. Kemet. So I don't buy the African tale because, of course, it's bigging them up above. They're playing into the same race game that they decry. They're actually playing into it by claiming that they are the super race. There is no fucking super race. It's man, and depending on how you work together, it'll depend on whether you rise or fall in your culture. So if you're living in a shit culture where everybody's shitting on everybody else, you need to understand that's because that's who you are as a people. So coming over here saying, we built your fucking civilization, we want your free fucking money because we blame you for what Empire did that's brought us here, because we're working for it really. It doesn't wash unless you're an infant and retard like Chalco Westminster, because it works for them. So it aggrandizes race, built on religious belief, and sanctions a God outside of yourself as superior to who you are. So it's not about you anymore. It's about you've got to look for this thing that's in the sky and go, oh, it's you. Did you say I could do this? Thank you very much. I can do it. That's the gig. Infants again, with toys. This birthed Johannism, or inner circle Templarism, into the European mind. Okay, so they completely converted what was into this new system. Now, there's a breakdown of the etymology of Johann. It's a variety of Christianity which rejected Jesus of Nazareth of the Christ, the Saviour, and accepted John the Baptist as the Saviour Christ. Now can you see why they've put John in? Now can you see when the Templars are claiming to be the protectors of the line of Jesus? They're not talking about Yeshua, they're talking about John the Baptist. This is the schism that they put into Christendom. Now can you understand it better? That's the game that's been played in this invention called the Bible. Alright, so that's just another investigation into etymology if you want. Now, Knights Templar were accused of practicing Johanism, which the inner circle was. The outer circle wasn't. And being Johanites accepting John the Baptist as the Christ. Now can you understand why everybody wanted rid? And this is the conundrum. It's the inner circle that were practicing this, not the outer circle. The outer circle all believed they were Christian soldiers. Yeah, fighting Mohammedans to keep Europe Christian. So it's if you don't get this inner circle, outer circle game, and this is in all secret societies, by the way, then is it any wonder that the outer circle, who don't know their ass from their elbow, can't understand why people think that what they see as the club they're in could be anything other than? Well, this is where you've got the rights in Freemasonry that have nothing to do with the guilds, which is a 3-right gig. Yeah, ends at Master Mason. Everything else is occulted. And as I've said before, that's what they were teaching me. Thinking I was going to go, yeah, I'll have some of that. Well, I was saying, no, fuck that, that's disgusting. You horrible little fucking imps. That kind of stuff. So related terms, Johann, Johannite, John the Baptist, John, St. John, see also Gnosticism and Nestorianism. There is the gig. So with the installation of John the Baptist, what the Templars began would be enshrined into European Christendom in the rise of usury on credit and divisions within the monastic system itself, and then on into the minds of the theologians and the populations through the form that is presented as the Renaissance. Now, this division in the church was going on right up to Vatican II. So even though this new creed had took over the power of the Vatican, it took a bloody long time for the clergy to let go of the old monastic theology. And of course, because they got all their own in and all this paedophilia that's been going on, I mean, how can you argue with that? If you're in an institution and all of a sudden it's coming to light that a lot of your orphanages and these priests and nuns are trafficking kids, killing kids, nicking kids, and sexually abusing kids, where do you go from there? You buggered. I mean, it was the final nail in the coffin, and of course Vatican II is this John the Baptist version of Christendom in its entirety. And that's what's happened to Christendom. And each time we've had a division in it, in come the usurers, and before you know it, you think you're doing well, but of course you now just become another slave in another matrix created by these same usurers. And this is what's happened. And it's happened across the world. This is how elites work. This is how they work. It's to keep their pyramid system going, you have to be enslaved. This is why all these secret societies are compartmentalized. When they're teaching you something, they're teaching you a false image of the degree that they're at, who are being fed a false image from the degree above. Because they won't let you up to the next degree until they know you're believing what they've told you at that degree, and it's wrong, and that you can see that they have absolute respect for you, and they'll believe whatever you say and do whatever you say. When that's happened, then they'll move you to the next degree and give you a little bit more knowledge. So you think, oh my fucking God, I'm advancing fantastically. I've got more cash because it's a bit of an upgrade on the old cash. Different network, different degree, different people. That while you're at that lower degree, you've been hearing snippets of who these people are and what they do and how important they are. So when you get up on that, you go, my ego is busting. I'm just so in honor and enamored by this fuss and fandangle. Thank you very much. I'll say no more and believe whatever you say. That's how it works. It didn't work on me because I was going, well, that's fucking bollocks. That's a load of fucking shit. That just satisfies this desire. That just means I can go around being this. Fuck that. That's not what I'm here for. So I'm not interested in your fucking jingle jangle. Stick your fucking castles. I'm not interested. And that's when they don't like you. That's when you become mighty dangerous because they know that they couldn't do that, which is why they're doing what they're doing. The lower rankers just think, well, this guy's fucking lunatic. He's not playing out like we are. But it's the fucking boys at the back who are the power. That's when they start to get shit scared because they're going, oh, fuck, we've got a fucking reel in here. This fucker's not playing along at all. And this player's getting fucking more and more advanced in his knowledge. He's going to become a problem. Let's see if we can do our best to make sure he gets killed. But of course, not often as you haven't at them points. They can't just kill you outright because you don't belong to them. This is how it works. Don't take your fucking horse. Bible's clear on it. Anyway, that's enough of me digressing. But that were my 1990s. It ain't a fucking easy gig, I'll tell you that. And everybody around me thought I was fucking crazy. Well, fucking great. Go for it. I don't care. I don't take my sustenance as to who I am from any fucker outside of me. I didn't from my mum, my dad, my aunties, my uncles, my grandmas and granddads. I didn't care what anybody give a fuck thought. I were already me. And that was it. And if you can't, that's the attitude it takes. Otherwise, you're going to be off. Any Tom, Dick and Harry is going to grab you. So with the installation of John the Baptist, what the Templars began would be enshrined into European Christendom in the rise of usury and credit and divisions within the monastic system itself and into the minds of theologians of the populations through the form that is presented as the Renaissance. Regardless of chronology, be that 1,000 years added, because it doesn't matter, or back 2,000 years, one thing is very clear. A doctrine that supported a superior race, determined in the wealth they hold, because they God give it them, as a pet's mean prize, for being good little slaves, hold that everything that's beneath... Now, this is the kicker. They hold that everybody beneath them, because they have these pets means prizes, has to obey their command, because they're fucking God said. And then that's formed and enacted with the most severe violence and entrapment they could imagine. Haven't they just? Inquisitions, Moss says you will pay us your fucking money or you'll be ostracised. That's violence. That's a form of violence. If daughter wants to leave, they'll kill her. It's called an honour killing. No, that's violence. Yeah? It doesn't add up, ladies and gentlemen, if you stop thinking with your emotion. In fact, you're not thinking when you're running on emotion, as we've discussed. Doesn't add up. None of these systems that are being forced on Christendom are superior to what was. They are inferior bags of shit. And I'm not claiming that what was were perfect. I don't fucking know. I was only born in 67. Actually, no, I'm 22. What's that meant? Never mind. But you get my drift. Don't be fooled because emotional idiots say, well, you mustn't say that. Fucking yeah. If it's real, say it. If it's true, say it. And don't be so scared. The 1600s on England completed the works began by the Tudors, a monarchy that had to execute over 1,000 Englishmen for treason. This is the Tudors. The Tudors executed over 1,000 Englishmen and women who were saying to them, that ain't fucking English. That's not English law. That's wrong. That's false. So you can see just on that alone that the fucking Tudors were doing everything contrary to England. They executed over 1,000 Englishmen. And then they executed a king. And then we got Johnny Cromwell. And they completely changed England forever in the 1600s. A monarchy that had to execute over 1,000 Englishmen for treason as it destroyed the monastic system, murdered a king, and abolished the English monarchy. It expanded the reach and power of Parliament, installed a private imperial conglomerate in the centre of London, and to appease the people, it installed what they believed to be a puppet monarch, who did actually undo the entire works of the private commerce in a quo warranto, putting the city back under England's jurisdiction. So Charles II actually did do his little best. And then James after. But this, of course, would be overturned. Now, this is where your Graham Moores and all these pisspot shitbags, you can start to see them for what they are. Because here's the kicker. All that undermining has been going on since the 1400s. Executed over 1,000 people, and that's the ones we know about. Killed a king, got rid of the office of monarch, abolished it, give a bunch of Johnny come latelys all the power they want themselves of Parliament. Enclosure has gone fucking demented. This is why they killed the king. He were opposing it. And of course they had fucking colonies to put all these people in. 210,000 Englishmen went to Caribbean, 110,000 went to Virginia. And people think that were a good gig. That's England, is it? No, that's not. That's England being taken over. So Charles II tried his best. But then they had to have an invasion. This would be overturned with the invasion of a Dutch warlord, William of Orange, and a centre of usury from which the government would be forced to get credit was commissioned in London, and that would be called the Bank of England. So I'm sick of listening to this. Fucking William and Mary. Oh, true English road. Fuck off. He were a fucking warlord. He invaded fucking England. Nobody were allowed to go anywhere near fucking London that were politically savvy or military, part of the English military. They were banned from going to London because he had invaded it. And who brought him in? The immortal twat faggots. The immortal commercial idiots. And everything they did then was take what were common law and put it under parliamentary statute. So they could twist it, shit on it, and screw it up so that we've got what we've got today, a bunch of idiots who have claimed sovereignty of a parliament that never was. Demolished the House of Lords, which was the highest court in the land, and put the monarch as a puppet below it all. So when you see these dipsticks at Parliament talk shit, they're above the fucking monarch. And you didn't see that coming. Well, it happened a long time ago, so you didn't see it happen. This would be overturned with the invasion of the Dutch warlord William of Orange and a central usury from which the government would be forced to get credit because they went to war with France in London that we call the Bank of England. The British Isles would be forced together under one state, under the dictate of the European bloodlines that had made home in Scotland before and after expulsion by Edward I. So Johannites, usurers. Upon this amalgamation, the German branch of this bloodline shift would be pulled over England as the Hanoverians from the Hanseatic League took the throne of Great Britain for the Prussian Empire, which of course was Rome. The Jesuits were installed in the newly built Vatican State that now acknowledges the Bible, and the clergy being undermined in the power of the Jesuits, which they were, slowly but surely what is superseded by the new brand called Christianity. So it was never called Christianity before this. The state has its new imperial headquarters in London, the Vatican State. A military monarchy right for colonising, that's the Hanoverians. You just look at when the East India Company got dark, when the Hanoverians were running the show. And they were following the colonising procedure of the Spanish and Portuguese, who have been doing it a lot longer. Portuguese first. They need a society in the shadows to ensure the new system cannot be broken. The Jesuits formed Scottish Rite Freemasonry in a Catholic chapel up there in Shaggerland, which expands into London and becomes the Rite of York. So, Freemasonry, as we know it today, is nothing to do with the guilds. It is 100% a Jesuit arm into the Protestant Reformation. Revolution becomes the order of the day across Europe and into the Americas. Revolution. Bloody. Not nice. The church would become subservient to the state, becoming the state church, and sanctioned under the premise that John the Baptist was the Christ and not Jesus. And the temple protected the real progeny of the Christ figure, John the Baptist. Well, it does make you look at, what's he called, Greg Allett, a little bit more done it. Doesn't it just? Because this is where he's coming from. Portugal, Templars. Still hasn't answered my question. Seeing the gig? And here are some key dates in the Johannite movement in England. 1705, Hanoverians are in almost. And there you go. Just a bit of a... And then there's a video there to help you see that if you wish. Then, with 46, I'll just flick through this. But this is what prompted that, actually. So that got more important than this. But I just wanted to say, as we exist today, the Vatican is a superstate to which all other states must bind. It's not the original church of the gospel. It has been superseded by the very temple of the gospel, the very temple that the gospel destroyed. It will submit itself to the laws of Noah and administer the world under the Talmud. How should we comprehend global finance today? I asked AI. What do we know about the USA propping up the yen by selling bonds in euros? This is one of those situations where the surface narrative, currency stability, hides the structural substance, geopolitical alignment, debt market choreography, and dollar hegemony maintenance. Direct answer. There is no evidence that the United States is directly propping up the yen by selling bonds denominated in euros. However, the United States does indirectly support the yen through the coordinated central bank actions, swap lines and debt marketing signalling. And Japan does issue euro-dominated bonds to diversify funding and reduce US dollar exposure. The confusion comes from Japan's Ministry of Finance and Bank of Japan's actions, not the US Treasury itself. The US has a strategic interest in preventing yen collapse because Japan is one of the largest holders of US Treasuries, which is debt. A weak yen forces Japan to sell US Treasuries, which would destabilize the US debt markets. So the US supports the yen stability indirectly, not through euro bond sales. Now, the Treasury holder dependency, Japan holds over $1 trillion in US Treasuries. That's a lot. So can you see when the petrodollar, when countries say we're not selling it in dollar, yeah, this is what's prompting these. Now, I'm going to flip through this because there's just some pertinent points I want to go in, and I'll just finish off what you guys have said. So if the yen collapses, Japan must sell treasuries. It doesn't have a choice to defend its currency. Selling treasuries raises US interest rates. Higher US rates destabilize US debt markets, and US borrowing costs spike. Dollar hegemony weakens. So therefore, the US has a structural incentive to prevent yen collapse. Okay, that's the reality of it. It says, it's used the term liquidity lines. So I said, what are liquidity lines? US dollar liquidity swap lines are agreements where the Federal Reserve lends US dollars to foreign central banks so they can supply dollar funding to institutions in their jurisdictions during market stress. They prevent forced selling of dollar assets, stabilize global markets, and form part of a worldwide network of liquidity lines covering most of global GDP. These swap lines are essential to yen stability, dollar hegemony, and global finance resilience. The central bank swap lines, a US dollar liquidity swap line, is a collateralized loan of US dollars from the Federal Reserve to a foreign bank at a defined interest rate for a short term. So these are short-term credit lines, usually for about 7 days. And they're repayable in the foreign currency. So they pay it back in their own. When the foreign central bank repays the dollars, the Fed returns the foreign currency. This allows foreign central banks to supply US dollar liquidity to the domestic banks without selling dollar-denominated assets. Yeah? And it created these swap lines because global banks hold dollar assets and dollar liabilities. Foreign central banks cannot print dollars. Dollar funding markets can seize during crisis. Forced selling of dollar assets destabilizes markets, and US dollar shortages can cause global credit contraction. Now, who has USD swap lines? So the Federal Reserve have swap lines with European Central Bank, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, Swiss National Bank, Bank of Canada, Bank of Australia, Bank of Korea, Banco de Mexico, Monetary Authority of Singapore, and others. So it really is the currency of the central banks. All right. So these were first authorized in 2007 and expanded during the global financial crisis and COVID-19. Okay. So you can read this yourself. I just want to go through some pertinent points. So I said, how close could Japan come to having to join BRICS to save the yen? Direct answer, Japan is not close to joining BRICS, but the conditions under which Japan would consider it are real, structural, and measurable. Japan would only approach BRICS alignment if 3 simultaneous failures occurred. US dollar liquidity stops supporting the yen, Japan is forced to sell massive amounts of US treasuries, or the yen enters a disorderly collapse that domestic intervention cannot stop. If those 3 conditions align, Japan will be structurally compelled to seek alternative liquidity, alternative reserve structures, and alternative trade settlements, all of which BRICS offers. Japan is not there, but it's closer than at any time since 1945. Japan's yen stability depends on the United States, US-Japan debt interdependence. Japan holds over $1 trillion, so he's just repeating some stuff, but it does give you a little bit extra. Japan would only import BRICS if the following structural triggers occur. US stops supporting the yen. Japan forced to sell treasuries. And yen enters disorderly collapse. Why BRICS is structurally attractive in yen crisis. BRICS offers yuan swap lines, gold-linked settlement, non-US dollar trade union channels, commodity-backed reserve structures, access to Russian energy, access to Gulf liquidity, and access to Indian markets. And Gulf liquidity is offshoring our land and property as cash for shareholders. This is how they're raping our countries. So this is what Dubai is. They're converting our land into liquid cash. It's going offshore in the hands of shareholders of hedge funds. And holding that liquidity is BlackRock, Vanguard. It's paper. It's not fucking real. They don't own anything on anybody's land. It's paper, now digital. And if you go into the digital, they own you. You are an asset. You still are already. Because you're a person. And access to Indian markets. The Jesuits are still in India. You see, this is Rome, all of it. So, I ask, is it correct that Argentina is now buying US treasuries? Because, of course, it's under the wing. Argentina has begun buying US treasuries again, but not in large volumes and not as a reserve building strategy. So it's basically buying it. It's dollarization aligned monetary strategy to rebuild credibility. So, when we look at this US dollar system, that is what's tied to Israel. Which is why at the beginning I offered up XLR Israel, i.e. BRICS, US dollar, hegemony, central bank, US dollar. So there's two sides in that sense, and I was just trying to show it in those terms, if you get my drift. Does it make a bit of sense now, that? So he's just doing what he's told, basically. Okay. But I want to get down to something that's a bit, because we're getting on. I mean, you might want to read this. It's interesting. And then, of course, there's the exploration on the Talmud when you can see that AI is playing. So why is Cuba being blockaded? Because, of course, it's strategically connected to Russia, China, etc. So that's basically the thrust of that, but it goes into detail for you. In essence, the US and China are locked in a financial battle for supremacy. Yes, the United States and China are locked into a long-term financial supremacy contest. The battle is not about individual policies, but about who controls global liquidity. Now, if we take the left-right socialism-capitalist game, socialists pull all private enterprise into the state, the capitalists give it to the shareholders, then this is what America's doing. America is liquidating all our assets in the West, Federal Reserve rather. The liquidity and manufacturing is all being held in China. So they're using the same model as we've discussed in these other live streams about the synthesis of left and right is neo-corporate fascism. And China is that synthesis. So they're using the same model on a global scale. China's the communists nicking all the private enterprise, and the capitalists in the West are sucking all the fucking West dry, liquidating it, shareholder in it, off it goes. Pyramid. So all this wind and piss about East and West is utter shit. It's a fucking game. It's one big game. And Islam is playing its role in that game. And it's not good. So stop this nonsense idea that it's something that we would benefit from. So I then ask her, there are two wars playing out as proxies for the US, Russia against China, Ukraine and Iran respectively. So they are at war as well. So it can go at any time. Right? There's your conscription. Now, BRICS is based in gold and manufacturing power. The US is based entirely on debt. From the perspective of the global financier, so I'm basically saying you've got BRICS has got actual capital, and the West is based on liquidity debt. So I say then, well, from, let's say you're the man at the top feeding all this credit, which is the best option? And this is where it gets interesting. Here's a direct answer, first followed by a full structural thing. From the perspective of the global financier, BRICS look stronger in terms of tangible assets, gold, commodities, manufacturing and energy, but the US looks stronger in terms of financial architecture. Liquidity, safe assets, regulatory dominance, dollar settlement. So the real answer is BRICS is winning the real economy war. The US is still winning the financial system war. But once it's liquidated everything, it's not required anymore. A global financier does not choose one or the other, they hedge both. BRICS reserves architecture. BRICS is built on gold accumulation, commodity reserves, energy dominance, manufacturing, rare earth control, food production, shipping and logistics. All China. Global financial sees BRICS as inflation resistance, commodity-backed, manufacturing anchored, geopolitically diversified, less dependence on debt markets, less exposed to US fiscal instability. What the US offers is financial architecture dominance. The US system is built on US dollar reserve currency, US treasuries, US dollar clearing systems, global banking, Federal Reserve swap lines, sanctions power, and Wall Street liquidity. And while it has its military, it can still back that. This is architecture, not commodities. A global financier sees the US as the world's liquidity provider, the issuer of safest collateral, the regulator of global finance, the enforcer of sanctions, and the anchor of international trade settlements. This is why the US still dominates financial supremacy, even though its system is debt-based. Financial great power competition. You see, and I were expecting it, because you go, yeah, it is going to synthesize, and it is. So there you've got the two in a thingy, but this is where it gets interesting. The structural contrast, neither side is better. They are different pillars of global value. So they're both required by these international bankers. There is no division, only in how they accumulate the wealth of the earth. So they're both essential. So when we broke it down to left and right, synthesis, shareholders get the lot. It's the same in the East-West so-called division. And it basically goes on to say, I'm sure I made it big, are you suggesting that the banking elite, the providers of credit to both sides, are better off with both powers in play? Or is it inevitable that one has to win? That's the question. Global financial elites benefit most when both power blocks remain in play. A single winner is not inevitable. And in fact, a single winner is not desirable for the global credit issuing class. A multipolar world with two competing financial architectures creates more volatility, more arbitrage, more demand for liquidity, and more opportunities for credit expansion. A unipolar world reduces volatility, reduces arbitrage, and reduces elite profit. So yes, the banking elite are better off with both powers in play. How about that? But as I said before, you can still see capitalism is sucking us dry, America, or the Federal Reserve rather, and China is collecting the booty. And its system is the synthesis of corporate neo-communist fascism. Or hell on earth. There we go. Now, I'll leave it at that, ladies and gentlemen, because I think we can see the picture a lot clearer when we start to absorb this. And I believe that historical introduction is very important if you want to grasp how the hell we've got into this situation today. Because there it is, ladies and gentlemen. There it is. So I shall say, well, what shall I say? Till the next time.
electronic engineering, electronic engineering, electronic engineering.